Mom, I can't do this anymore. $50 a month for allowance is just not possible. Sarah, who had moved out for college, would come back home a few times a year, but I had never heard her say anything like this. What? I'm transferring $11,000 every month. At first, I didn't understand what Sarah was talking about. I was taken aback, but Sarah yelled back, just as surprised. What? $11,000? Was there a mistake with the transfer? No, that couldn't be it. If there had been a mistake, I would have heard from my sister-in-law and her husband. The monthly allowance was being transferred to my sister-in-law and her husband's account. It would be a big problem if Sarah got busy with college life and forgot to pay the rent. That's why I had been transferring the amount for Sarah's living expenses to my sister-in-law's account. They were supposed to hand over $800 to Sarah after deducting rent. Sarah crying on the phone couldn't possibly be lying. No way. A thought crossed my mind. I didn't want to believe it, but it was the only explanation. After hanging up with Sarah, I hurried to a certain place. My name is Jane. I'm 47 years old. Currently, I work part-time at a local supermarket. After marrying my husband, Mike, we were blessed with 2 children. Our eldest son, Ben, is 23 this year. Our daughter, Sarah, is 20 and currently attending a university in the city. Sarah has been a bit of a scatterbrain and lively since she was little, so I never imagined she would get into a well-known university in the city. Unlike Sarah, Ben was always serious and good at studying from a young age, but now he's almost a recluse. Ben becoming reclusive was triggered by failing his college entrance exams. Being introverted, Ben had few friends and was proud to be more academically inclined than Sarah, who often played with her friends. He convinced himself that studying was more important than having fun for his future. Maybe he didn't want to lose to Sarah, who was enjoying her youth. He kept top grades in high school, but somehow Ben failed his college entrance exams. Everyone thought he was sure to pass, so the shock was huge for Ben. He also couldn't understand why he failed. On the day of the results, we prepared a feast expecting him to pass and waited for him to come home. But the moment we saw Ben's face, we knew what had happened. He had a look of despair I had never seen before. Since then, Ben hardly ever leaves his room. He's not aggressive towards us, and we can communicate with him, but he has no intention of working and shuts down at the mention of getting a job. Watching Ben's failure, Sarah seemed to have been making her own efforts. She studied hard in secret and managed to play in between. She dreamed of becoming a teacher and challenged a prestigious university. To Ben's astonishment, she passed. It wasn't that Sarah and Ben didn't get along, but Sarah's university acceptance undoubtedly accelerated Ben's withdrawal from the outside world. Sarah rented an apartment in the city while Ben lived a reclusive life. Even though my husband was working, our family finances were tight. I had been a stay-at-home mom for years, but due to these circumstances, I decided to work at a local supermarket. Since I hadn't worked outside after getting married, it was all very new and quite challenging, but I had no choice but to work hard for the sake of our children. Sarah, who was attending a university in the city, was living in an apartment managed by my husband's sister, Emma, and her husband. Emma's husband was making a living from real estate management inherited from his parents. The cost of university tuition alone was substantial, so I was truly grateful for my sister-in-law and her husband's support. I hadn't seen Emma since our wedding, so honestly I didn't know her that well. But now that Sarah was renting a room from them at a low cost, we began communicating by phone. Since I only had a little impression from talking briefly at the wedding, I felt uneasy about this offer. Based on that impression, it was clear Emma didn't like me. We had a pre-wedding family gathering, and the sister-in-law and her husband seemed displeased the whole time. Even when I greeted them, the response was cold, and I thought I didn't want to interact much with them. We hadn't been in touch for a long time, but my husband reached out because of Sarah's schooling. "Have you been keeping in touch with Emma regularly?" I asked my husband, feeling uneasy, but his answer was vague. "Yeah, I contact her occasionally, and I think Emma is trustworthy." It was clear from his attitude that they hadn't been in much contact, but his trust in his real sister seemed strong. Feeling it would be petty to express my concerns now, I decided to accept my sister-in-law and her husband's offer. Sarah was anxious about being taken care of by an aunt she had never met, but she couldn't complain. She smoothly went along with the suggestion from me and my husband. Once Sarah started living in my sister-in-law's apartment, my husband began receiving frequent calls from Emma. I thought he was concerned and asking about Sarah's well-being, but listening to their conversations, it seemed not to be the case. She's just nervous because she hasn't seen you guys for so many years. Can't you be a bit more understanding? Apparently, my sister-in-law and her husband didn't like Sarah's attitude. What do they think of their own niece? Since Sarah herself hasn't said anything, I think they're just complaining to my husband. But my unease grows day by day. Is it okay to leave Sarah in the care of such people? I tried to slyly ask my husband if Sarah was getting along well with my sister-in-law and her husband, but he just evaded the question. Sarah wouldn't tell me the truth, wanting to spare my feelings, so all I could do was trust my sister-in-law and her husband. But that trust was quickly betrayed. One day when my husband and I went shopping at the department store, I was buying groceries while my husband wanted to check out a different floor by himself. I saw no reason to object and accepted his request. The shopping finished sooner than usual. Not wanting to wait around, I went to look for him on the second floor. Just as I was about to call him, I saw my husband in a high-end brand store. What was he doing? Feeling a bad premonition, I approached him. "Mike, what are you doing here?" My husband visibly panicked when I suddenly spoke to him. "This is, it's..." He seemed to have purchased something, and a clerk was packaging the item. "Could I please confirm the shipping address for this?" When I pressed him, it turned out the purchase was for Emma. He said he was coerced into buying a gift for her because she was taking care of Sarah. I was appalled by this fact and suggested we should immediately find another place for Sarah to live. However, my husband refused, saying it would be disrespectful to my sister-in-law and her husband. Fortunately, Sarah herself seemed unharmed, and my husband strongly persuaded me to wait and see a little longer. Pressed by his assertive tone, we ended up maintaining the status quo. A year after enrollment, a shocking truth came to light following a phone call from Sarah. "Mom, I can't take it anymore. $50 a month for allowance is just impossible." She had come back home a few times a year, but I had never heard such a thing. "What? I'm transferring $1,000 every month." Initially, I couldn't understand what Sarah was saying. I was taken aback, but Sarah yelled back, just as surprised. "What? $1,000? Was the transfer destination wrong?" No, that couldn't be. If there had been a mistake, I would have heard from my sister-in-law and her husband. The monthly allowance was being transferred to my sister-in-law and her husband's account. It would be a big problem if Sarah got busy with college life and forgot to pay the rent. That's why I had been transferring the combined amount for Sarah's living expenses to my sister-in-law's account. They were supposed to hand over $800 after deducting rent to Sarah. Sarah crying on the phone couldn't possibly be lying. She must have been living on the edge. I hurriedly transferred the money to Sarah's account, as she was struggling to even eat anything that day. Before confirming this fact with Emma, there was someone I had to talk to, my son, Ben, because the monthly allowance for Sarah was being transferred by Ben. Ben was mostly reclusive, but I had asked him to make the transfer occasionally to encourage him to go outside. It was an important task related to Sarah's livelihood, so it was also a way to show trust in Ben. I couldn't believe Ben would steal the allowance, but he might know something with a guilty conscience. I knocked on Ben's door. "Ben, I just got a call from Sarah. She said she's only getting $50 for the allowance." A big sigh could be heard from inside the room. "Are you saying I stole it?" Ben's direct response came back the next moment. He had sensed the slight doubt that had begun to sprout in my heart. I hastily denied it, but there was no more response from Ben. That night, when my husband came home, I immediately shared this puzzling fact. "So, I guess I have to have a serious talk with Ben." After hearing my story, my husband muttered as if he was convinced Ben had stolen the allowance. He had been observing Ben's reclusive behavior, naturally coming to that conclusion. Ben had no income and spent his days locked in his room, but packages he likely ordered online arrived frequently. He suspected these packages were bought with the stolen allowance for Sarah. "It's not decided yet. Can't you contact Emma to see if she knows anything?" I wanted to believe in Ben and asked my husband, but he seemed annoyed, thinking I suspected Emma, and replied, "Are you saying Emma stole it? If you're going to say that, you might as well call her yourself." Feeling it was futile to continue discussing with my husband, I decided to contact my sister-in-law. When I mentioned Sarah's call to Emma, she reacted with what seemed like exaggerated surprise. "What? You're transferring $11,000? I only get $300 a month." Indeed, $300 was enough for rent, but didn't she find it odd that Sarah only got a little for her allowance? "I heard from Mike, but it's Ben who's making the transfers, right?" From Emma's words, it was clear she wanted to suggest Ben had stolen the money. "I do ask Ben to make the transfers every month, but there's no way he'd do something to trouble his sister." I got angry at Emma's insinuation and blurted out my words a bit too excitedly. "So what are you saying? Are you implying stealing the money?" Emma snapped back and then abruptly hung up the phone. I just wanted to know if she was aware of any issues, but the way she immediately framed Ben as the culprit felt off to me. A few days after Sarah's call, a hospital in Tokyo contacted me on my mobile phone. Sarah had collapsed from overwork and was rushed to the emergency room. Though they explained she was not in life-threatening condition, I rushed to Sarah's side. Guided by a nurse, I entered Sarah's hospital room to find her looking much more haggard than before. "Mom, I'm sorry to worry you like this," Sarah murmured weakly, then forced a smile for me. After our phone call, I had transferred a little money, but it seems her past overexertion had led to her collapse from overwork. I learned she was working part-time jobs till late at night after her university classes. With only $50 from Emma, she couldn't even pay her utility bills, and she was working hard every day to scrape together money for food and transportation. "Why didn't you say anything when you came home?" I asked. "I didn't want to worry you." Had Emma seen Sarah like this for over a year and thought nothing of it? Shouldn't she have cared even just a little? I had always been grateful to my sister-in-law and her husband for renting out the room at a low cost, but that gratitude had turned into anger. I explained to Sarah that I would be staying here for a while, and then I immediately headed to my sister-in-law and her husband's home. When I rang the bell and announced my name, Emma seemed shocked by my sudden appearance. Well, it's no wonder she collapsed, getting only $50 a month. When I told Emma that Sarah had collapsed from overwork, she laughed and muttered that comment. "Didn't you ever think something was off? Didn't you care about Sarah at all?" Unable to contain my anger, I spoke with a tone full of fury. "Who do you think you are saying we're to blame? Do you realize who's been enabling your daughter to live?" Emma yelled back, ready to lash out at me. I had felt it over the phone before, but now it was clear something was off. She seemed defensive, as if guilty of something, and lashed out in response. "First of all, it's obvious that your no-good son has been stealing the money, and you're blaming us. Do you have any proof?" Emma slandered Ben, then abruptly ended the conversation and forcefully closed the door, throwing me out. I stayed in the city for a while to watch over Sarah, during which I talked about the allowance and how Ben had been transferring it. "Are you saying Ben stole it? That can't be. Ben would never do such a thing." From our conversation, it became clear that Sarah had been questioning her aunt and uncle's actions since the beginning of her enrollment. She knew I wouldn't be content with just $50 for allowance. However, she didn't bring it up, thinking there might not be a mistake with the allowance amount. Her consideration made my heart ache. A few days later, all the medical tests confirmed there was no abnormality. Sarah's complexion had improved significantly, and she was ready to be discharged. "I'm sorry for worrying you so much, but I'm okay now." Though suspicious of my sister-in-law and her husband, Sarah was also worried about Ben. She was concerned whether my husband had said anything that might suggest Ben had stolen the money. I gave Sarah enough money and decided to return home. Back home, my husband hadn't received any contact from Emma, and he hadn't spoken to Ben either, which relieved me that the worst-case scenario had been avoided. I went to see Sarah and also stopped by Emma's. I told my husband about Sarah's gaunt appearance and how she had been working tirelessly every day for living expenses. I criticized my sister-in-law and her husband indirectly for not noticing Sarah's condition. "Well, Emma is busy, so she probably only sees Sarah when giving her the monthly money." Angered that my husband was more concerned about Emma even after his daughter had collapsed, I confronted him. "Don't you care at all that your daughter has collapsed? Is Emma that important to you? She's even calling Ben a thief. My husband made a clearly displeased face at my words. It's obvious Ben did it if you think about it. Normally, what about all the packages he receives? How did he get the money to buy those things? He excitedly conveyed his thoughts, but then looked regretful, realizing he might have said too much. Anyway, stop speaking ill of Emma. Can you try asking Ben a bit more if he knows anything? Saying so, my husband awkwardly left the room. After a while, I heard the door to Ben's room on the second floor open. Ben came out of the room. He must have heard our argument and decided to come out. Descending the stairs, Ben sighed deeply, looked me in the eyes, and spoke. I swear I've never stolen any money. I would never take Sarah's important money. The seriousness on Ben's face was evident. Ben, who usually stayed in his room, had come out specifically to clear his doubts. Mom, I'll go to Emma's place and ask directly. I nodded at Ben's words. We decided to visit Emma's home the next day. It had been years since Ben and I went out together. Despite the situation, I couldn't help but think about how long it's been. Ben was silent throughout the train ride, but his demeanor convinced me that my sister-in-law and her husband were stealing the money. Ben's eyes said it all, and Ben was very worried about Sarah. He couldn't forgive his aunt and uncle for putting his dear sister through this. He said he wanted to talk, but probably he wanted to vent his anger at them. It wasn't just the insult to himself he couldn't bear, but the harm they'd done to Sarah. When we arrived at the station, Ben and I immediately headed to his aunt and uncle's home. We hadn't called ahead, predicting they might use any excuse to turn us away. As expected, Emma was clearly flustered by our visit. She seemed incredulous that Ben, who was supposed to be reclusive, was here. Emma, long time no see. Sorry for the suddenness, but I'm here about Sarah's allowance. I've been transferring $1,000 every month without fail. This is the correct account, isn't it? Ben didn't even give Emma a chance to interrupt, showing her the account number on his mobile phone screen. This is important. Could you check it right now? Emma's eyes darted around, but at Ben's insistence, she went to get her mobile phone. When Emma returned with her phone, Ben immediately spoke up. So can you check? I'll tell you the number. After Ben recited the account number, Emma opened her mouth. It seems correct, she said. Hearing this, Ben nodded emphatically. That's what I thought. So could you now show us the online banking screen? If it shows a transfer of $300, it means I've made some mistake. Ben looked Emma straight in the eye as he said this. Indeed, if Ben had been stealing the money, as Emma claimed, this screen would prove everything. Last time, Mom visited you and you flat out accused me of stealing the money, didn't you? If you show us now, Mom will understand whether her son is lying or not. Ben was like a detective from a drama, trying to prove his innocence. Emma, on the other hand, could do nothing but stand there, overwhelmed by the situation. Why should I have to show you the content of my online banking? Are you saying I stole it? Emma snapped back at Ben, clearly agitated. But Ben remained calm, not rising to her provocation. I'm not saying you stole anything. There might have been a system error. Could you please show us the name of the depositor? I joined Ben, urging Emma to comply. Then Emma, her face turning red, screamed, Enough! You're the one who stole the money, and now you're playing dumb, Emma shouted like a tantruming child, trying to drive us out. But opposing Emma's shouting, Ben forcefully stated, I'll prove you stole it. For a moment, Emma fell silent at Ben's determined voice. After witnessing this, Ben said, That's enough for today, turned his back on Emma, and left. I followed Ben without saying a word. Ben, wait! Ben's face was twisted in frustration. He was upset he couldn't prove his innocence. I'm sorry for speaking in a way that sounded accusatory, but I don't think you stole anything anymore. I apologized sincerely, trying to comfort Ben. Responding to my words, he muttered, I know. I told Ben I was going to visit Sarah, who was recovering, but without being able to prove his innocence, he probably felt he couldn't face Sarah. Ben said, Can I go back home? And left for the station alone. After visiting Sarah, I returned home. Later, Ben had gotten home before me and seemed to have secluded himself in his room, unnoticed by my husband. Since then, my husband has been awkward. avoiding both me and Ben, pretending to bring a meal. I'm sorry I couldn't do anything. Sarah's feeling better now, so don't worry. Hearing about Sarah, Ben seemed relieved and opened up. I'm sorry for always making you worry. I didn't say this before, but I've been getting some work online. I was surprised at Ben's words. Listening further, I began to understand what he meant. Being shut in for years, it's no surprise you'd suspect me of stealing. Ben laughed. To prove where the money for his packages was coming from, Ben revealed a secret. After failing my entrance exams, I spent months just escaping from reality. But realizing I couldn't continue like this, I started self-studying programming and design. Ben, who was always quick to learn and studious, had grown to the point where he could earn money from these skills. Over the years, I was still at an amateur level, so I was planning to tell you once I could make a living from it. Tears naturally fell as I heard my son's unexpected confession. Seeing me cry, Ben said with a laugh, "You don't have to cry." But he must have been filled with remorse, trying to dispel his own uncertainties. Ben spoke again. Actually, there's something else I want to tell you. With that, Ben began to speak with conviction. So I was called here by Ben the next day. Rala, my sister-in-law, was sitting in our living room. The story Ben had told me the day before was about Rala, another aunt of his. After his exam failure, Rala, who had always been close to Ben, had been concerned about him more than us. It was Rala's influence that got him started on programming. After hearing about Sarah's allowance issue, Ben had first consulted with Rala, knowing that Rala and Emma did not get along. Unlike my husband, who placed absolute trust in Emma, Rala did not trust her. But Rala gets along well with my husband, and even occasionally visits us. However, she dislikes Emma. Indeed, Rala has been a great help to me in stark contrast to Emma. Rala suggested we trick Emma into spilling the beans. With Rala, Ben seemed lively and happy. Seeing Ben this joyful was rare, and I couldn't help but feel grateful to Rala. Emma making my cute nephew go through all this will expose her lies. Rala seemed eager to give Emma a taste of her own medicine. Plotting with Ben, without Rala, I can't imagine what would have become of Ben by now. Watching the two of them, I felt conflicted as a parent, but relying on Rala's plan was our only option. We prepared ourselves and decided to confront Emma again tomorrow. We were determined to make her regret insulting our dear son. Suppressing our eagerness, we readied ourselves for the next day, and so it was. The next day, did Mike notice anything on the train to Emma's? Rala, munching on a sandwich, started the conversation. Fortunately, my husband seemed unusually unaware of our plan. I feared he might side with Emma if he found out. At this stage, it's clear he cares for Ben and Sarah, but he seems unable to oppose Emma. According to Rala, it's always been that way. It's more like he can't oppose her than trust or respect. Rala spoke with a sense of frustration. Compared to my serious and dull husband, Rala is bright and carefree. Growing up seeing Emma dominate my husband, she strongly decided not to become like that. Rala still lives as a single person, freelancing for a living despite failing her exams. Seeing Rala making her way independently must have encouraged Ben not to give up. We arrived at our destination. Rala's plan, surprisingly simple and almost childlike, was met with her full confidence. "This is where it's different," she said, pointing to her head and smiling at Ben and me. "What's going on?" Upon arriving at Emma's house, Rala confronted her in a flustered manner. Emma hadn't expected Rala to visit. "I was asked by Ben to make a transfer for him once, and now I'm being blamed. They're saying I stole the money." Following Rala's lead, we hid near Emma's house, watching the two from a distance. "What? Why would you make a transfer for Ben?" Emma expressed her anger at the succession of troublesome matters. "Anyway, I live nearby, so I'm in more trouble than you, sis. Unlike Ben, I keep all my transaction records." Emma's face turned pale at Rala's last remark. "What do you mean by that? Are you also saying I stole it?" Rala didn't let Emma get away with her attempts to lie through the situation. "Then where did the $800 go?" "Fine, I'll have my brother look at the saved transaction details. Rala said this and was about to leave Emma's place. Then Emma immediately shouted, Wait, I understand. Just wait a moment. Just as Rala planned, Emma took the bait. I'll give you a little money, so say that Ben told you to steal it. They'll believe whatever I say over the words of a reclusive son. At that moment, Rala smirked maliciously. Sis, are you saying you stole Sarah's money? Emma, thinking Rala came to demand money, responded with a click of her tongue. You don't change, do you? It's obvious if you think about it. Of course I stole it. It was just as suspected. Ben, having overheard their conversation, ran out. So it was you who stole it. Emma was surprised to see Ben suddenly appear. What are you doing here? Unable to grasp the situation, Emma turned to look at Rala standing by. Then Rala couldn't help but laugh. Sis, you've always underestimated us. That's why you were deceived so easily. Rala then became serious again and took out her mobile phone from her pocket. Just so you know, I recorded our conversation just now. Emma glared at Rala resentfully, but suddenly clung to me and Ben. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cause trouble for Sarah. It was just a moment of folly. Ben, I'm also sorry for saying terrible things to you. Emma spoke in agitation, then knelt on the spot, deeply apologizing to us. Stop it, sis. It's shameful. I'll report this to our brother, so just wait until then. It's useless to run. Emma burst into tears on the spot at Rala's final words. Hearing Rala's let's go, Ben and I decided to leave the scene. Afterward, the three of us headed to the apartment where Sarah lives. The truth of the incident was revealed from Rala's mouth, proving Ben's innocence. You know, Sarah never doubted you, Ben, at all. I explained Sarah's feelings, but the two seemed to understand each other without words. Anyway, it was decided to move out of the apartment immediately. Due to a year of hardship, there was hardly any luggage in the room. It took less than an hour to pack up everything in the room. Let's go home for now. After a light meal together, we returned to our home where my husband was waiting. I see. After hearing our explanation and bringing Sarah back, my husband sighed deeply. We played the recording of Emma's conversation that Rala had, explaining the whole situation. Emma's actions shocked my husband, but he started to speak hesitantly. Ben, I'm really sorry for doubting you. My husband apologized to Ben. Ben accepted the apology with a nod. Rala, send me that audio file. I'm going to the police now. My husband decided to report his sister-in-law's theft to the police, a decision that must have required immense courage. This might finally free us from Emma's hold. A few days later, after my husband explained the situation to the police, Emma and her husband were arrested. The evidence of theft was clear in the online banking app, and they quickly confessed to their crimes. The arrest was devastating for a couple running a real estate business where trust is key. According to my husband, who visited the police station several times, Emma's mental state deteriorated each day. Being betrayed by her brother and sister, whom she thought were under her control, was a huge shock to her. She seemed to realize that the real hell would begin after serving her sentence. Their company's survival was in jeopardy, and their luxurious lifestyle was now impossible. Watching my husband, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. The money meant for Sarah was returned from another account of Emma's. With that money, Sarah rented a new apartment on her own terms. This time, she decided on her own without the help of my sister-in-law and her husband. Ben, along with Rala, started a small design company. It seemed like a good opportunity, spurred by Rala's initiative. Seeing Ben's actions, my husband seemed to have lifted a weight off his shoulders, though he still felt guilty for doubting his son. They started talking more than before and began improving their relationship. This incident caused by Emma was traumatic for Sarah and Ben, but at the same time, it deepened our family's bond. Ben starting to work eased our financial burdens, but I decided to continue working. Watching everyone move forward made me feel that way. I vowed to advance together as a family of 5, including